Okay, thanks. Once again, everyone, my name is Shayla B. Coe. I'm the Executive Director of Build Mobile. Thank you for joining us for our very first community virtual meeting for the Unified Development Code. In these current times, we've had to rethink and alter our community engagement process. I appreciate you all for being flexible and patient as we work through a few kinks with our efforts. But throughout this process, we've worked very hard to communicate with the public. And so we will stay engaged in multiple ways throughout this process. For our registered participants, I'd simply ask you to indulge in one piece of direction. If you've got a question, and we will be going through a very comprehensive PowerPoint that details some of the significant changes in this version. If you would just simply raise your hand using your emoji hand, that will help us to know that you have a question, and we will pause to stop to be sure that your comment or question gets answered. So with that, I have a brief video that we'd like to show that highlights our work up until this point. And so we will stop and take a quick pause for this 4-minute educational piece.
Mobile is taking our vision to action.
In November 2015, our city adopted Map for Mobile, a new citywide plan for preservation, revitalization, and growth. Map for Mobile is a long-term vision that provides principles and goals to guide future planning, regulations, and decisions. It also contains dozens of specific action items.
The Map for Mobile contains our ideas as a community. In the past, I was invited to community meetings so that we could sit down and begin to decide what were our visions for our city.
Well, I think everyone has been engaged, and that everyone in the community had a chance to weigh in and say their ideas for the community.
It was definitely interesting to see the large number of people that came out and were very interested in what was going on and being involved in the process.
Our citizens had clear priorities during the Map for Mobile process. They wanted better design in new development, better protection of our natural resources, a more walkable city, preservation of our historic neighborhoods, and a streamlined permitting process.
I think this plan is a huge step, and I think it's going to require us to be intentional in our future design and in the future building of the infrastructure, so that we are putting in place the building blocks that we need to ensure that walkability, bikeability, increased transportation, increased access to various resources in the community and amenities is just a part of how we're designed.
That he wanted to make the city so that we could have our children want to come back.
Having plans like this makes it better for the people living here, as well as it's good for the economic development of the region, because it's where people are going to want to come and live.
And I think people will be happy to know that their input meant something, because a lot of times, and I think a lot of people at the time said, well, okay, so what's going to become of this? Because I probably was one of those people too that said, okay, so we've given our input, what's going to happen?
For over 3 years, the city and its partners have been working hard to bring Map for Mobile to reality.
But I think we've seen a number of things in our community. We've seen a number of things happen. And, you know, the streets are, for the most part, the streets are better. It was mentioned earlier that, you know, there's sidewalks in this community where there've never been sidewalks before.
I think there's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of discussion and talk between partners that maybe didn't talk as much in the past. I know definitely from a health perspective, we have meetings with developers, we have meetings with the city, all focusing on trying to see how we can build health into the community and really design smart for the future.
I've seen a lot of changes in the past 3 years, especially the downtown area, and I wish they would hurry up and come into my neighborhood.
It's a vision. It's a vision for long term. It talks about zoning and future planning. It talks about expansion and inviting others in to be a part of our great city.
There's got to be a leader that's going to push things forward. And in sports, you have to have a leader, a coach, that makes sure that they're winning. And hopefully everyone will see that the whole community is winning by ensuring that this Map for Mobile is engaged.
Map for Mobile is not just another plan on a shelf. It's your vision. The city is turning that vision into action.
That's why I support.
I support.
I support.
I support the Map for Mobile.
Okay. We'll move forward with the today's presentation. Before we get started with that, I'd like to introduce two members of our team that have been very instrumental in getting us to this point. We have a cross-disciplinary team of planners, engineers, architects, attorneys that have been involved up until this point. But today you're going to hear from Margaret Pappas. She is our Deputy Director of Planning and Zoning. And also later in the presentation, you'll hear from Mr. Bert Hoffman. He is our Deputy Director of Long Range Planning. Now I'll turn it over. We'll get started in the presentation. And again, if you've got any questions for our registered participants, if you would just use your hand waving emoji to get our attention. So what we hope to accomplish today, as was highlighted in the video, is this has been a multi-year effort that started with our comprehensive plan, Map for Mobile. To date, we have introduced our Unified Development Code in draft. 3 iterations have been presented to the public up until this point. And so today we'd like to highlight some of the key changes that you can expect to see within this draft version. We'll highlight our timeline moving forward, give you an opportunity to learn how to communicate back with us using our online portal, but also learn how you can determine how your property will be addressed with respect to this code. So it's a very user-friendly tool that will give you a lot of information at your desktop. So to begin, just very quickly, our zoning code currently dates back to the 1960s, and that was the last time that it has been completely overhauled. Our goal with the Map for Mobile initiative and with the Unified Development Code is to modernize that very dated document. It is our hope that through best practices and incorporating the great deal of feedback that we've received over the last couple of years is that we have a new document that reflects our land use development patterns that currently exist within the city. So just very briefly, the purpose and intent of a zoning code is to set rules, standards, and procedures that guide development or redevelopment within your community. But in addition to that, our top priority through our zoning tool is to help Mobile strengthen its neighborhoods, but remain economically competitive and viable as we are striving for a quality place for Mobilians and for others that are willing or interested in relocating to our community. So throughout this process, we are consistently balancing community needs. As we have gone through a very exhaustive communication and outreach process, we've heard from folks that reside in our neighborhoods that have invested greatly within their communities and in their private homes. But we've also heard from the business community and making sure that we have a predictable and streamlined process that helps to achieve our economic development goals. So with this process, we're working to address both of those needs. Most recently, the National Association of Realtors in its spring 2019 periodical highlighted the value of zoning. And rather than it being seen simply as a regulatory tool, how, when done correctly, it can work to enhance and promote investment in your community, as well as address many of your quality of life needs. So for us, this really validates our work and helps us know that we're moving in the right direction. Additionally, that same periodical goes on to talk about the importance of form-based codes and how they help to reinforce a unique sense of place. We are a 300-year-old community that's unlike any other, and we want to maintain that those dynamics that make Mobile who we are as a community. And through form-based codes, as we have evaluated and researched other communities that have incorporated these standards, we hope that we've applied standards that are helpful in helping to move Mobile forward. So along the way, very important to this process, we've heard from folks within the construction, real estate, tourism, small business, health, and our neighborhood leaders to understand their needs and why zoning is important to them. So understanding their unique perspectives has been helpful to us. And as we march toward seeking approval from our Planning Commission and City Council, it's really important that we understand their needs, but make sure that they are a part of our long-term strategy for making our community stronger. So just a quick timeline as to how we got to this point. As was highlighted in the video, the Map for Mobile initiative began in 2015. We had a series of community meetings all over Mobile to help understand individual perspectives and how redevelopment and development is viewed in our community. Once that comprehensive plan was developed, our very next step was to update our future land use plan and our major street plans. Those two documents were presented to our Planning Commission in 2017. The adoption of those documents allowed us to move forward as a very next step with a complete rewrite of our zoning code. In 2018, we disseminated our first document for public review. We heard from citizens, we refined it further in version 2, and here we are today where we have released just last month, or actually in March, prior to the COVID-19 crisis, that document was released. We held off on that to give folks time to make sure that they understood the various provisions in that code. And so we're at a point now where we are initiating the feedback process. Since that time, we've convened over the last 2 years over 75 small group meetings. Once the code draft 2 version was released, we received over 1,000 comments from private citizens, the real estate development community, nonprofit groups, all of our various community partners. More than half of those comments received were very specific to the zoning map that was released in version 2. The balance of those comments came to us in the form of feedback regarding the various articles and provisions outlined in version 2. As we have released the UDC version 3 in early March, we have commenced with the 30-day comment period. So beginning actually last week, May 28th, that started that 30-day review process. We'll talk later as to how we can continue to receive comments from the public using our online portal. Those comments have been very valuable to us in this process, and we look forward for continued engagement through that tool. We will go over in detail some of the critical changes shortly, but I would encourage you to go to our mapformobile.org site, where we have a summary document that highlights the proposed changes within version 3. It's an easy read. It highlights those the key changes at a glance, gives you some specific notes as to our rationale for the revisions that we've made. It gives you a reference point to highlight where you can see the specific language that was outlined in version 2, but also tells you where exactly to go in version 3 to see how we've responded to the changes that were presented to us. So I like to call this our cheat sheet. So if you find this 200-page document a difficult read, this is your summary of some of the key changes that you'll find in this draft version 3. So moving forward, the public review process will last for 30 days. We are still in the informal comment period, meaning there are no statutory requirements at this stage as to how our community engagement should work. However, once the 30-day process concludes, we will take the necessary time for staff to review the balance of the comments that we've received during that 30-day review process, and we'll make any necessary changes. We'll informally advertise that draft for another 30 days, but consequently after that step, we will move forward with the draft version 4 that will be presented to the Mobile Planning Commission. At that point, that starts our formal public hearing process. How we advertise and communicate with the Planning Commission and the public regarding the changes to the UDC are outlined in our state code requirements, and we will be following that. Once we have a vote of confidence in the form of a recommendation from the Mobile Planning Commission, this document will be presented to the City Council for review, as the UDC is a legal document that is subject to approval by the council in the form of an ordinance. So, with that, for our registered participants, if you have any questions regarding the process up until this point, I'm happy to answer those. Okay. Seeing no hands, I will turn over the presentation to Margaret Pappas to highlight the key changes in version 3.
Good afternoon. Major changes and highlights to this document. As Shayla may have mentioned earlier, one of the largest changes is that we are maintaining our existing zoning district names. As Shayla pointed out earlier, we received over 600 comments regarding the zoning map. So with the zoning district names remaining the same, we are proposing no changes to the zoning map. That helps reduce confusion and improves consistency within the document and with other ordinances within the city code. If you recall, in draft version 2, we did propose a zoning district of commercial warehouse, as well as maritime districts, maritime mixed, light, and heavy. Those zoning district options are retained in draft version 3. However, they are not mapped. So they will still be available as a zoning district for an applicant to seek on their property. The table of uses has been clarified. The table of uses are located in Article 2, and a use would be allowed by right, conditional use, or special exception. Here's an excerpt from the use table in Article 3. As you can see, you have S's. Those are special exception uses. Special exception is assigned to uses that are of neighborhood impact. As you can see, a bed and breakfast in R3, RB, HB, B1 is allowed with special exception. Special exception is a one-step public hearing process with an application to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Uses allowed by right means that those uses are allowed in that zoning classification without a public hearing. For instance, data processing is allowed by right in B3 through CW. The final use category is conditional use. Conditional uses are those uses that are seen to be of citywide impact. Conditional uses would require 2 hearings. The first public hearing with the Planning Commission and a final public hearing for approval with the City Council. In draft version 3, we have retained the form-based standards. However, they have been simplified. If you may recall, in version 2, you had very set form-based standards depending on the zoning of your property, and they were requirements. There was no flexibility built into them. We have proposed changes to allow more flexibility, which I will get into in the next couple of slides. We have retained urban and suburban subdistricts in residential and some commercial areas. And again, I will get to that in the next few slides. So, why form-based standards? Form-based standards protect neighborhoods by implementing design requirements to improve the quality of development, and they also allow for development to be more in keeping with the existing design fabric of the community. It supports development because our form-based standards proposed in version 3 allow flexibility for compliance. Additionally, form-based standards does elevate the type of development that you would have, providing more bang for your buck, as it were. And with increased form-based development standards in place, you have reduced requirements for public hearings. As mentioned earlier, we still have form-based standards. However, they have been simplified. In draft version 2, you have requirements in all of these categories: site frontage, height, wall, and architectural features. However, depending on the zoning of your property, you were limited to the elements of each of these categories that you could place on your development. Version 3 allows a menu. In site frontage, you choose which type of frontage type you have. You only choose one. You choose one height element, one wall element, and one architectural feature. You can employ additional elements if you choose. However, you have to have at least one. And these elements apply to all new multifamily, commercial, and maritime mixed-use development. Here are some existing examples in terms of the building types within the city that comply with that menu of standards. So we do have structures that are already in compliance with those building type requirements. As mentioned earlier, we did retain urban and suburban subdistricts. The method by which these areas were mapped were based on several criteria. First, if the area is located within a nationally or locally recognized historic district, if the area was developed prior to 1950, or if it was located along a streetcar line, it was then mapped urban. The remainder was mapped suburban. Again, these two dichotomies only being applicable for certain residential and commercial classifications. These standards affect the lot size, lot coverage, setbacks, and things of those nature, and thus allowing development to occur in an area that is more compatible with the existing fabric. Right now, if a commercial use proposed in a B2 district in an urban area proposed to locate closer to the street, they would have to go and get a variance. The urban B2 requirements allow you to get closer to the street and then stipulate your maximum setback as 45 feet. Another major change is that neighborhood overlay districts have been moved from appendices into individual articles within the UDC. We have several neighborhood plans that have been recognized by the city: the Village of Spring Hill, Africatown, Peninsula overlays, as well as the Historic District overlays. All of these overlays are now mandatory standards and have their own article within the UDC version 3. We also have, as part of the map for Mobile, we are developing resources for community groups with our neighborhood planning toolkit. As mentioned previously on those various overlay districts, those communities came to the city with a plan for the development within their community. This toolkit is designed to give other neighborhood and community groups a path forward for implementing their own neighborhood plans. Another major change is that tree protection and preservation requirements are removed from the Unified Development Code and will be a new chapter in the city code. Again, I need to stress these are the requirements and the authority of the Mobile Tree Commission and tree protection requirements. These are not your landscaping and tree planting requirements. Those are still part of the UDC and are outlined in Article 3. The final major change are to the definitions. The definitions in version 2, we had several defined terms that had a unique definition within the Unified Development Code, but then it would have a different definition within the Downtown Development District, and then possibly yet another definition for the Village of Spring Hill. We've taken all the definitions and researched, and all defined terms have the same definition from the DDD to the UDC to the Village of Spring Hill. So it doesn't matter if you're located within the Hank Aaron Loop or out in West Mobile or the Village of Spring Hill, a defined term means the same thing across the board. Article names have been changed. If you look at version 2, the articles and what is regulated per the article, there have been massive changes. Article 2 are zoning districts. Article 3 are development standards. Many people have had in prior sessions, they've had questions, where did these requirements go? I don't see them anymore. And they're still there. Development standards is now simply Article 3. Uses are regulated in Article 4, and those are uses that have additional requirements such as telecommunication facilities. And as you see, as discussed earlier, Africatown is Article 11, the Peninsula, Village of Spring Hill, and Historic Districts are Articles 12 through 14. So before we continue on with Bert showing you how to interact with the website and gather information, does anyone have any questions? All right, Bert?
Okay, for version 3, we have updated our website, mapformobile.org, to provide all these different changes that we've made in various formats. So on the mapformobile.org website, you'll find the cheat sheet that Shayla mentioned. You'll find an interactive map where you can check zoning and overlays. You'll be able to review, download the articles for version 3, and you'll also be able to leave comments either about specific locations on the map or about the articles. On the interactive map, this is a story map, and version 2, the story map had many more pages to it. Since we are going to retain all of the existing zoning districts as they are currently mapped, this version of the story map is much shorter. So through this, you can check the existing zoning of a property. You can see if it is within any of the neighborhood overlays, such as the Village of Spring Hill, Africatown, or the Peninsula. You can also see if the property is within an urban or suburban district. And then you can see our proposed changes to the future land use map. So this is an example of zooming in on the interactive map and clicking on a specific piece of property. It'll bring up this information box that tells you what the existing zoning of the property is, if it is within an overlay district such as Africatown or the Peninsula, if it's in a zoning subdistrict. In this case, it is in the urban subdistrict. And then at the bottom of the box, it also shows you what our current future land use category designation is and what we are proposing to change it to, in this case from mixed density residential to low density residential. In the middle of this pop-up box is the blue text that's underlined. If you click on that, that'll take you to a dialog box where you can leave comments specific to this piece of property. And so the other ways to give feedback, in addition to option 1, where you can comment on a specific location based on the map, you have option 2, where you can comment on the articles themselves by choosing a topic or entering a topic, and then which article the topic might be in, and provide your comments as well as your contact information. And the other way you can provide feedback is, by mail, sending it to the attention of Shayla Biko, or by dropping off your comments here at Government Plaza.
So just to recap our timeline, we have initiated the informal comment period for version 3 that began on May 28th. That process will close on June 28th, so we encourage you starting now up until the end of this month to communicate with us, questions, thoughts, ideas, feedback with respect to the version 3 document. Again, we will take the time to process the comments that we've received throughout this phase of our work. Any changes, revisions, or edits to draft 3 will come out in a new draft version 4. We will informally advertise for another 30-day period. But once that period of time commences, we will take that draft version 4 and advance it to the Planning Commission, and we will go through our formal public hearing and advertising process. And once again, having received a positive recommendation From the Planning Commission, we will move forward to City Council and will be subject to that review process. That concludes this phase of the presentation. We'd love to be able to answer any questions that our registered participants may have. Looks like William Lotta has a question.
Yeah, so under the new regulations, the Planning Commission no longer has final authority over any of the zoning applications.
Restate your question. I think I understood it, but I just want to make sure I'm following. One more
So
time.
currently, the Planning Commission has final authority over PUDs and planning approvals, but under the new regulations, a plan development or a special condition would either go to the zoning adjustments or the city council, and there's no application that ends with the Planning Commission.
Okay, I'll let Margaret clarify.
Okay, first of all, William, PUDs as we know them right now go away. In that if you have a development where you're wanting to share parking and access, have more than one building on a single building site, the typical triggers, if you would, for a PUD, that is no longer required. As long as your plan comply and your uses comply with the standards of that district, you simply go to obtain your permit and begin construction. The PD in the proposed version 3, PDs are unique and they are for developments that do not or cannot otherwise comply with any of the zoning districts in the UDC. So a PD development would be submitted to the Planning Commission, and it would essentially be its own zoning code for that piece of property. It would regulate use, form, parking, signs, landscaping. It will essentially be its own zoning code for that site. As such, by state law, the Planning Commission would only be a recommending body on the PD, with the final approval going required by the City Council. Related back to the conditional use permits and special exceptions, you are correct. Conditional use permits are a two-step process, with the first hearing with the Planning Commission, which would only make a recommendation. The final hearing would be with the City Council. But again, conditional use permits are associated with those uses that are more of citywide interest. The neighborhood impact type uses, such as a church in a residential area, would require special exception. You are correct, special exception does not go to the Planning Commission. However, special exception and the requirement, special exception is outlined in state law, and special exceptions by state law go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment.
Okay, Kathy?
Just because I know we're going to have to explain this to people, you know, I wanted to just ask you to walk me through a process. For example, let's say you know, an organization comes through, I mean, a development idea comes through. Now we have a sign that says there's going to be a zoning meeting. Will there still be signs on properties that are up for being rezoned? Will that still happen like it used to, like it does now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then a person who wants to look at, oh gosh, what's this going to be rezoned as, goes to, where would they go to access the information about what that property is going to be rezoned as? Is there a vehicle, like, you know, I would contact the office. I'm already on the list of everything that comes up before the Planning Commission each week. How would an ordinary citizen then find out more about what that rezoning proposal is going to be?
Would you talk
Well,
about the neighborhood?
It
meeting
will
requirement?
be the same process in order to, if you want to come in and look at an application, but we also have the availability of applications being submitted online. And in that case, anything submitted for an application is available for public review remotely. There are requirements in the UDC for public meetings relating, though, only to items that are going to the city council. Special exception will not have the public hearing requirement based on state code.
No, it has the public hearing requirement. It
I
does
mean,
not have the
the public-
neighborhood
The
meeting
neighborhood meeting
requirement.
So there is a distinction. A public hearing associated with the planning commission is the formal process. You come to Government Plaza and you make your application to the commission. But we have instituted what we're calling a neighborhood meeting requirement in the instance, as an example, for rezoning. So if a developer comes to make a request to rezone his or her property, they submit the full package of materials that we would require. But prior to the planning commission public hearing, he or she would have to organize a neighborhood meeting with adjacent property owners to explain the specifics around his or her development proposal.
I appreciate that. That's important for us to know, because the last time we undertook this problem with the Fusaklis trying to come into the neighborhood on a residential lot, he didn't want to meet with the neighborhood. He only wanted to meet with one representative of the whole neighborhood, and he refused to have a neighborhood meeting. Then we had to press further, and finally we were able to get a meeting, you know, an open meeting with the neighborhood. But if a developer decides, you know what, I don't want to do that, and they just say, well, we'll meet with the two people or the people who are within 300 feet, that's it. We're not, neighborhood isn't going to be defined as the neighborhood by us, the developer. It's just going to be defined by the few properties that are within whatever 100, 300 feet. Will we lose the ability to have those larger public neighborhood meetings should the developer decide they just don't really want to do that?
Ms. O'Keefe, if you would look in Article 5, which is procedures, it outlines the requirement for a neighborhood meeting.
Great.
Who has to receive notice. And I can tell you, the same people that receive notice for the rezoning have to receive notice or be sent notice of the neighborhood meeting. There also has to be a sign posted on the property regarding the neighborhood meeting. Depending on your application for rezoning, you know, that neighborhood meeting's required. I think it's also required for conditional uses.
And plan developments.
Yes.
And plan developments. That helps. We had some neighbors on that Fusaklis problem who were not notified, who were within the, you know, the distance, but it was because the city didn't know who they were, you know, at that address. So they weren't able to, maybe they, you know, they just didn't know. So they didn't get notified. I guess what I just want to try to explain to the people in our area is what kind of access we'll have to being a participant in the review of some of the projects that come up. How easy will it be for us to do that, or will we get stonewalled? You know, you guys know me. My biggest fear is just that there will be avenues that people will be able to use to go around what to me is common sense access and transparency. And because, you know, I don't know enough to know how this is going to work. I guess my biggest fear is what I don't know. What you guys have done to lay it out looks just beautiful. I've just been in Mobile for 53 years, and I know what happens behind the scenes, and the tradition, you know, of that. And you know, I think I'll give you like for example, real quick, so people will understand.
If I could, Ms. O'Keefe, if I could say, you know, we see value in this requirement for a couple of reasons. Number one, it gives the adjacent property owners and surrounding community an opportunity to communicate with the developer, to understand the merits of his or her proposed development. It gives the community an opportunity to ask all the right questions when sometimes the public hearing process doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. But it also, you know, affords the developer with the opportunity, you know, to hear from the community such that there may be a way to tweak or revise a development in a way that may be more palatable to the community. But at the end of the day, it provides the Planning Commission with the confidence that every effort was taken to ensure that the public has an opportunity to learn about what's proposed for a developer. So we see it as a win-win situation.
Okay. Well, if you feel confident, because I trust you guys, if you feel confident that it's going to give us what you know we need, which is a chance to understand and a chance to respond and a chance to have, you know, a conversation. You know, we don't want to get into fights with people. We really don't. We just want to work together so that we both get what we want and what we need as with as good a compromise situation as possible. Listen, if you feel good about this and it's the way you think it ought to be, then I'm okay with it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think Ms. Winter has a question. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Shayla, I hadn't learned how to do those emoji things yet. So
a good old-fashioned hand wave is fine.
Yes, I just waved my hand. Thank you for taking my question. Very quickly, I thought I heard something in the presentation about the process of approval was involving the city council for approval on a lot of things. So can you kind of clarify? I'm a little concerned. I'm certainly respectful of their approval and their input. I am concerned just the processing of that. And do you see it from a time frame running parallel with what we deal with now, or do you see that process adding some time to it? Am I making sense?
Well, I mean, so the city council's role and responsibility in this is steeped in our state code requirements. So there, we for instance, with the rezoning, there's just no way around that. The Planning Commission purely makes a recommendation that has to be affirmed by the city council. Now, what we've tried to do is to understand uses that could serve as a complement to a neighborhood. If you go back to the way that our communities were developed 50, 60 years ago, you know, having smaller scale amenities that could support a neighborhood that help to maintain the viability of that neighborhood, in our minds, are the types of things that we don't want to create a long, complicated process to give a person the approval to put a nice, sweet coffee shop next to a neighborhood that has a lot of pedestrian accessibility, a lot of people that are walking and using sidewalks and are less reliant on the car to you know, get some of their basic needs met. So we have taken a look at our chart of permitted uses, which, let me say, was very old. It had over 600 uses on it, many of which don't really sync with current development, retail, our retail and manufacturing fabric. One of the examples that Margaret likes to use is a lapidary. Our current ordinance speaks to a lapidary, which I believe, Margaret, is a
Stone cutter.
stone cutter. So I don't think we have many of those around these days. So we tried to eliminate as many of that old, outdated uses as we could. So where we feel like some of those uses need to be treated a little bit differently, we have attempted to address that so that you don't have to go through a long, complicated process to get to approval. But some of the more global uses that have community impact that all of us, as a community would want to weigh in on, we have maintained the procedures in place and try to beef some of those up where necessary, because the Planning Commission, because it has only the responsibility to make a recommendation, the City Council has to have the ability to weigh in, because this is an ordinance that they adopt. I'll ask her if you want to clarify that or offer any detail. So I would say, visit the chart of permitted uses to see. It clearly explains what the path forward are on particular uses, but what we've tried to do is to understand uses that make sense to help support a neighborhood where a long, lengthy process is not necessarily unnecessary, but if it has a greater impact or a significant impact or an adverse impact to the neighborhood, we've tried to put, the appropriate procedures in place so that they could be dealt with so that the public has visibility into those proposed developments. And so that's been our rationale. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. I see William Latta has his hand up, and also see Mr. Glenn Agnew. So I'll go to William, and then we'll take Mr. Agnew. William?
Is there a procedure to change or appeal either street classifications or the urban, suburban, sub-district classifications? I know with the zonings, you could rezone a property. Is there a mechanism for the other classifications?
It would be a rezoning. Because it's still, if you look in Article 2, you have R1 and then sub-district, urban, sub-district, suburban. It would follow a rezoning process. Now, if you had a specific comment or concern, I would suggest logging that into the portal. But
would that be the same for the street classifications?
The street classifications as they relate to the downtown development district or the major street plan, or what do you mean?
Yeah, the major and minor streets and the different types of frontages required for each.
Well, the major and minor street applicability, I believe, is only for the Village of Spring Hill area or the downtown development district. We do not have that, I think, in any other part of the city proposed in version 3.
Okay.
Glenn Agnew? Hold on. Oh, we're unmuting you.
There you go.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. We submitted, AT&T submitted some information back on May 1st, comments back on May 1st. Just wanted to make sure that those comments were received, and you don't have to submit them again since the 28th to the June 28th is the official comment period.
And they were submitted under your name, or was there?
Tom Alexander, actually.
I'm sorry?
Tom Alexander.
Oh, Tom Alexander. Okay. And they were submitted through the portal?
No, they were not. They were mailed.
Okay. If you could, I will pass along my contact information. Quite honestly, with the COVID-19 situation, we're receiving our mail fine, but just the staffing, we're rotating staff. So I just needed to clarify and get with our admin assistants to see if those were received. But I'll give you my information and I'll get yours so we can follow up.
Thank you.
Mr. Isaacson, we thought we would just, because you've teleconferenced in and you don't have the ability to hand wave traditionally or otherwise, did you have any questions?
No, ma'am, I have not been hand waving. You were very kind and it was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
And we have.
Uh-oh, one more time, your last remark.
I said we've all watched it. It's been excellent. Thank you. You answered our questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, William, hold on. Wait, we'll unmute you.
Yeah, just two more quick questions. With planned developments kicking in at, I believe, 5 acres, for small commercial development, say, is the only process to go through the Board of Zoning Adjustments if they cannot or do not want to meet the zoning regulations?
I would say that would be on a case-by-case basis, and you would need to sit down with staff to discuss, you know, is it more of a use issue? Is it more of a site development issue before proceeding forward? But planned developments, you know, they are their own zoning classification.
But for say a 2-acre site, that wouldn't qualify for a planned development.
No, based on the criteria, it would not.
And so the only route they could go would be to the Board of Zoning Adjustments?
I would have to follow up on that because there's a lot of moving pieces in terms of how you would want to propose it. Do you have a specific area in mind that generates this question?
No, just the area requirements for planned developments and what sites of smaller area would be required to do.
Gotcha.
And then my only other question is, I believe in the regulations or procedures, it mentions the requirement to verify that sewer and water utilities can be provided for the site. Has the city developed any standard processes with malls to handle these verifications?
No.
Any other questions? Hearing no other questions, for the general public, this presentation, PowerPoint, if it has not already been done, will be uploaded to the mapformobile.org website. So the PowerPoint that was shared today will be made available for folks to download. I would encourage, we are really trying to encourage people to use our online portal. As I mentioned before, we received over 1,000 comments. Of those 1,000 comments, 400 of those were specific to articles. And so it's helpful to us to stay organized and making sure that we're being responsive. And we send it in this very room, and we pour through all of those comments individually, and we're constantly referencing the code to see if we have an aha moment, if there's something we could do to better clarify, or if there's an issue to revisit. So I am certainly open to getting communication in other forms, but as much as we can rely upon the portal, that's very helpful to us as a team, as a staff, given the volume of commentary that we receive. With that, I'd love to entertain any more questions that you may have. If not, I'd like to remind folks that June 28th serves as the concluding date for the 30-day review for draft 3. And so we encourage you to reach out through the portal. And if you've got some questions, we're happy to get on the phone and conference with you if they're more detailed in nature. But I appreciate everyone's participation and patience today. And Kathy has a question. I see Kathy's hand wave. Okay.
Just real quick, Dr. Phil Butera has been coordinating a response gathered by meetings of the neighborhoods out along Grelot Road and all these areas out here, even in other districts besides 6. So I will do the same thing, follow up, just to make sure that you received the document that he's prepared on our behalf.
Okay, sounds good. Mr. Agnew, let me go ahead and give everyone my email address. And I'm happy to share for all those in registered participants and for live streamers. But to reach out to me directly, my email address is shayla.beaco, SHAYLA .BEACO at cityofmobile.org. And feel free to send me an email, and I'll follow up with Mr. Agnew with you directly. And if you've got any other questions, please communicate with me through the email, and I'll follow up with you as quickly as I can. I appreciate your participation and look forward to hearing you as we further refine our work. I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon and stay safe.